Flex your business with an American Express Business Gold Card. You'll earn 4 times membership rewards points on your top 2 eligible spending categories, like transit and electronics, each month, on up to $150K in combined purchases per year. Plus, you can now earn 3 times membership rewards points on flights and prepaid hotels booked on AmexTravel.com. Terms and points cap apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-gold. Amex Business Gold, built for business by American Express.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. From your morning podcast to your afternoon playlist, State Farm knows you personalize your entire day. And that's why State Farm helps you personalize your insurance with the State Farm Personal Price Plan. It offers coverage options that help protect what you care about most at an affordable price just for you. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices vary by state. Options selected by customer. Availability and eligibility may vary.
You know, you have that desire. DNA is very, very strong and important unless it isn't. That's how it is. It's not important when it comes to my dad. It doesn't matter to me that I don't share half of his DNA. But, you know, when it matters, it matters.
Welcome to DNA Surprises, a podcast that delves into the world of unexpected DNA discoveries. I'm your host, Alexis Auersalt. In July 2021, my life took a surprising turn when I found out that I'm an NPE, a person who has experienced a non-paternal event. In other words, my biological father isn't who I thought he was. Join me as we explore the stories of NPEs, adoptees, and donor-conceived people and their families. Get ready to unravel the astonishing journeys that begin with a simple DNA test. This is DNA Surprises. Did you know that every month the DNA Surprises podcast community meets in a virtual support group? We started the Third Thursday Meetup in 2023 to serve as an additional resource for NPEs, late discovery donor-conceived people, and late discovery adoptees to find community and support. Third Thursdays have quickly become one of my favorite nights of the month, due in no small part to the 2 people who are sharing updates in this special double update episode. Liann and Pat uncovered their DNA surprises in very different ways. Liann found out long before consumer DNA tests, while Pat uncovered her surprise more recently. In the first half of this week's episode, Liann joins me to share her progress as she moves into the advocacy stage of her DNA surprise journey. At around the 26-minute mark, Pat joins me for the second half of this episode and shares how she's doing nearly a year and a half after her surprise. Be sure to listen to Liann and Pat's episodes, linked in the show notes, and then come back here to listen to their updates. Thanks to Liann and Pat for joining me again. By the way, if you want to sign up for Third Thursday meetups, go to dnasurprises.com/events. Hi, Liann. It's good to see you again.
Hi, Alexis. How are you?
I'm
always
doing
good to see you.
Yeah. So I'm so excited to catch up with you. It's been a year since your episode aired and almost a year and a half since we had a conversation, a recorded conversation about your story. For anyone who's listening, I have since met Liann a couple of times at the Untangling Our Roots conference, and she's become a friend and just a light in the community. She joins the Third Thursday calls almost every month, and it's just been so awesome to continue to get to know you. Thank you for joining me to share an update on your story with everyone.
Thank you. And I ditto everything you just said about our connection, because I do feel like I am thankful to be able to call you a friend.
Oh, thank you. Where we left off last time was you were entering the advocacy space with your DNA surprise experience. For anyone who hasn't heard Liann's story, I will post her original episode in the show notes. But where we kind of left off was you had not made successful contact with your biological father. Both of your raised parents have passed. And you were really kind of entering this place of peace and acceptance with where you were, and then wanting to take that forward to help other people. So what has happened since the last time we spoke?
Yeah, so now it's been 16 years since I found out that the man who raised me wasn't my biological father. So I'm about 5 years out from finding the paternal side. And I really just wanted to find something that would help me get involved with the NPE community. And I think that I was ready to figure out what that was going to look like around the time of the Untangling Our Roots Summit, the first one. I was really excited to go to just network and make connections and just get to meet people that could help me foster what I was looking to do, whatever that looked like. And then after the summit, I was in the NPE network and I saw one of the group meetings that they have on their calendar. And I joined it that night. It was a Sunday, I think. And I joined it. And I want to say that's probably the only one I've joined, actually. They were talking about the Certified Trauma Specialist program. And I think that in my episode, I might have left off kind of mentioning that that's what I wanted to do. So last year I did do that. The Certified Trauma Specialist program is through the International Association of Trauma Recovery Coaching, which is also associated with the NPE network. You'll find Dr. Paulette Bethel is part of the network, and she's also part of the Trauma Recovery Coaching Association too. And she was my instructor with the NPE part that I did this year. Bradley Hall was my instructor for the first part of it last year, and he's part of the NPE network, so some people might have heard of him. But the Certified Trauma Specialist program really just expanded my vocabulary, my terminology, my knowledge all around trauma as a bigger umbrella. And Bradley, as an NPE himself, was also incorporating a lot of that topic discussion within our class, but it was focused on trauma as a larger umbrella and the talking about your parasympathetic nervous system and how you identify what your nervous system feels like under trauma, PTSD versus complex PTSD, family dysfunctions, and just all of the trauma, right? So that was 10 weeks. Then this year, I just completed a 15-week course for an advanced focus on NPE. That focused on any trauma that touches the NPE community, right? You have secrets, you have moral injury, you have identity trauma, you have grief, new realities, hidden wounds, NPE betrayal, which I know you just had a discussion on betrayal trauma on one of your recent episodes, which was so good. We had a week where we talked about whether or not to tell. If I were to go to the coach route, which I don't intend to at this point, but we talk about good approaches to take with somebody you might be coaching, depending on what their situation is, to help them determine whether or not telling or not telling is the right route for them. Because there's no right answer, right, for anybody that's in our situation. It's not just an umbrella, yes, you should tell. As much as a knee-jerk reaction I want to have with that, because that's where I come from.
Right.
Not every situation is the same. But yeah, just a lot of that trauma. Mother wounds we talked about, which I don't know if you talked about that, if you've had a facilitator on to talk about mother wounds, but
we haven't.
I meant to tell you that might be a good topic.
Absolutely. I'm going to add it to my list right now. So how are you taking this certification and applying it to your life? You mentioned you're not necessarily going the coach route. So what are you doing?
Right. So I don't technically have a coach certification through what I did, because there is a track you can take that is just this certified trauma specialist versus the recovery coach. And the reason I did that was because I didn't envision, although there may be some people in my circle that would disagree with me because I feel like I'm already doing this, but I didn't with friends, right? Just in my friend group.
Yeah.
I didn't see myself having the one-on-one client. I didn't envision myself doing that. What I envision myself doing with this specifically is I work in healthcare, non-clinical. And so I'm an auditor. I work in internal auditing. So it is very non-clinical. But I do work in a very large healthcare system that is identified as the third largest healthcare system in the United States. And we're a multi-state system. And what I envision is getting conversations started at first within my healthcare organization, and I'm hoping that it grows, getting conversations started around the importance of genetic identity, how providers should have a trauma-informed approach when patients come to their office with a discovery, and they should not be met with, well, that's okay, we can just erase your history.
We hear that so much.
That doesn't, or that doesn't matter. It's okay. It's not a big deal. And whenever I would see somebody commenting in the Facebook group about having a doctor with that response, it lit a fire under my butt because I did not have, luckily, that was not the experience that I had. I was very fortunate to have a doctor that showed me very much compassion. She stopped what she was doing at the computer. She looked me in the eyes and she asked me if I was okay and had a conversation with me about it specifically. And that's how a physician should respond. And even going a little further in helping the patient find resources to, a therapist, find resources to the online support group. What I really want to do on top of getting these conversations started is I want to have educational materials that the providers can give the patients in these situations with the resources that they can go home and then have for themselves. I also envision situations where a pregnant woman goes to their OB doctor for a visit and they have a very authentic conversation or vulnerable conversation about not being sure if they want to tell the father that they're pregnant or they don't know if they want the father on the birth certificate, kind of a conversation that those obstetricians often have with their patients, right? And so how awesome would it be? It's obviously, there's got to be some sort of moral distress that happens with a provider with these conversations, or in a situation where a physician has the discovery in their hands. If they're a genetic counselor and they have the discovery in their hands, some providers will not disclose that discovery and some providers will. There's no stance taken, no consistent stance taken at a federal level. Different organizations have different stances, and I don't even know what stance our healthcare organization has at this point. I'm trying to find that out. So moral distress is a big thing. And so I envision, back to the visit in the obstetrician office, having some sort of educational material that the doctor can provide to the patient. This is what can happen to a child if their genetic identity is withheld from them. This is what can happen to them as an adult. This is why the child knowing their genetic identity is important. Having a true medical history in their medical record is critical. So having that type of information on hand to give to patients that would not have even crossed their mind, so that at least they can make an informed decision. I don't know that in all cases or in any cases, it should be the responsibility of the physician to say, this is what you should do, right?
Right.
But at least arming the patients with the information to help them make an informed decision is what I really want to do.
Yeah. I mean, that's incredible. The work that you're doing, this is the kind of stuff that I hear from guests all the time, right? That they have these conversations with their doctors, they feel dismissed, or the doctors just don't know what to do. They're humans too. So they don't always know. They don't always know what to say or do in these situations either. And I think giving them that education so that they can respond in a more compassionate and informative way is incredible. So thank you for doing this work for our community. And I also just want to say, on the coaching side of things, that yes, Liann said she did not think that she was equipped or prepared or anything for that. But as I mentioned earlier, in these Third Thursday groups, I know that you have reached out to people separately and made special connections with them and helped them as they navigate. And you just do that out of the kindness of your heart. So thank you.
You're welcome. I do. I like the connection. On one hand, it's selfish reasons, it's, I like to have that connection, that community too. But I also like to help people who are earlier on in their journey from somebody who's further in, right? I just look back on the beginning of my journey, and had I had anybody to talk to at all, would have been so much different at the beginning. I didn't have anybody because when I found out, DNA testing wasn't even a thing. I was just all alone on an island wondering, who else this might have happened to. I knew I wasn't the only one. I mean, come on. But how do you find each other back in that day,
Exactly. Kind of on that note, your personal story, how are you doing? I mean, we left off, like I said, with you kind of got the answer you were going to get from your bio dad. He's still alive. He wasn't interested in having contact with you. Your dad had passed away before this discovery. Your mom had dementia, when you found out you couldn't really talk to her about it, and then she passed. So where are you at with your personal journey?
So honestly, I'm really just focused on this part of my healing. This is where I'm at in my healing, the advocacy work. I just got done writing a 15-page paper for that and turned that in last weekend. I haven't talked to my half-sister in a while. The last time I did, though, she actually reached out to me, which was probably the first time she's reached out to me unprompted since we first started talking. But it was just a hi, how are you doing kind of a thing, still very superficial. I know I did tell you that there was that one post on Facebook that I saw.
Yes. Do you want to fill people in?
I can't remember exactly what it said, but it said something about winning the lottery and finding family doing a ancestry DNA test or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it said.
Like, I'm never going to take a DNA test because if I win the lottery, I don't want a bunch of family members to reach out to me or something like that. Yes. Yes.
So, and this post that he kind of put up, because I can only see like public posts because I'm not a friend of his on Facebook, right? So that was a public post that I saw, but it was from like a year and a half ago because I was just kind of scrolling, as you do every once in a while, periodically, right? So I got a hankering to just make a comment. I said, or is it because you're afraid to find out who you know is already there?
Yeah.
I still haven't gotten anything.
No response. Okay.
No response. No.
Would you still like to have contact with him? Would you like some sort of relationship with him if that was possible?
A relationship? I don't think that I would want a relationship. I think that he showed me what he deserves in a relationship from me out of his response. Would I like to look him in the eyes? I kind of do.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair, right?
I can't promise that there won't be a little surveillance happening if I'm ever in his area.
I mean, and I think that just really goes to show, right, that you can be this far out from it and still have that desire and
Yeah.
want to know.
Mm-hmm.
Has anything changed for you? I mean, knowing that it's been 15, 16 years for you, has anything
Mm-hmm.
changed emotionally for you since the last time we talked? Maybe as a result of doing your training or just time?
Yes, I've done some inner child work since our recording, and there was a lot there that I realized, I had a really amazing Reiki session that brought my 7-year-old self, my 12-year-old self, my 19-year-old self, and my current self all together in one place. I was crying. It was amazing having a realization in that Reiki session, what each of those, and I know you just did a session on parts work too. So that was kind of like what I was envisioning when I was listening to that episode, is those were my parts. Those were when I was doing the inner child work. So the 7-year-old is the one I'm supposed to call on when I need joy in my life and I just need to be playful and have fun, because that's what her role is. My 12-year-old self is who I've really been working hard with healing her, because that's when my parents started getting sick and I started having to kind of raise myself on my own, and went through all the trauma with my mom and dad's critical illnesses and all of that. And then the 19-year-old self, there was some trauma there with contentious relationship with my mom, and I got kicked out of the house when I was 19. And so there's a lot there too. And I'm supposed to call on the 19-year-old to help me when I need to make decisions, because she needs to feel important and needed. So there was a lot of realizations that I got out of that. The work on myself has not stopped. Even outside of taking these classes, I always try to find different things like that to help me make different connections. Intergenerational trauma is huge too, right? It's getting even deeper and making the connections in the generations that you didn't even know, including my paternal side, who is Jewish, right? So there's all of that trauma on that side that I don't even know the family history about, but that doesn't mean it doesn't affect me.
Right.
They say generational trauma can go back. There's studies that say it can go back 14 generations.
Wow.
14 generations.
Wow.
And so you think about all that they experienced in just the way they lived in all of those different times. It's a lot to think about, but I just feel like I'm honestly at the point for myself where I just, as hard as doing the work is, and as hard as some of the connections are to make, I've seen the beauty on the other side of it. And so I just focus on that. That's what keeps me digging for more, because I've seen the beauty on the other side each time, and the way it makes me feel, and the growth that I have, and what I can use to help other people.
And you are really helping other people. You kind of talked about what's next, but is there anything else that you're looking forward to as you just continue working through all of this?
Yeah, I really just want to continue making connections. I've gotten in touch with the Right to Know organization. So I signed up to be a mentor for that organization. So if anybody wants to reach out to me, I am a mentor through the Right to Know. But if anybody wants to connect to you and get my email, you're more than welcome to give them my email. But yeah, just continuing the advocacy work within my organization, trying to connect with the people that can help me get these conversations started. We do have a department in our organization called the Trauma Recovery and Resiliency Department, which I think is amazing.
That's incredible. Yeah.
And we have a department of that title, and they are tasked with just putting out all sorts of trauma-informed education to providers, to people in all departments. And one of their focuses is moral distress, which genetic identity falls under that umbrella, right? So
absolutely.
I've talked to them about my story and what I'd like to do and what my vision is. So I've connected with them, but then they're also tasked with, they have this program in that department called the Together as One Peer Support Program. They have trained ambassadors that are just available in the organization, within your department, with other people outside of your department, and then reach out to you if there's any workplace stressors going on and they need to talk to somebody. There's that support group available that is in addition to or outside of the employee assistance program, right? So it's just something additional. It's another way that our organization is really putting trauma-informed approaches in the forefront and getting that communication started too, which I think is really, really great. So I'm just trying to kind of tag along with that in any way I can because it's not my department, but I'm still trying to connect with the right people.
Yeah, I just, again, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. You know, you're not doing it for the reward other than for your own, knowledge that you are helping other people. And it's just so inspiring to see. And I'm so grateful that you're in my life and that we have connected. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing an update with everyone. And I mean, I'll probably see you at Third Thursday next week. So I'll see you soon.
I do have to say the same to you though, Alexis, with all the work that you do and, the community that you've created for us. When I talk about the community and the networking, you're part of that. And what you've created is all part of that too. So thank you for that. And for the podcast, just everything that you do, your retreat that I still want to get to someday.
Yes.
When I'm listening to your bonus episodes and this is a facilitator that's going to be at, then I'm like, oh, I wish I could go.
I know. But, there's just so many incredible events and resources that are coming up for people now. And
which is good.
It's great. It is wonderful. And it's good to have too many choices, I think, when it comes to this kind of stuff. And I'm very much a rising tide lifts all boats, and everybody has to find what works for them and what they connect to. And so, yes, hopefully we will see you in the future. But again, just thank you for joining me today. And I'll see you next week for our Third Thursday Meetup.
Yes, sounds good. See you soon.
After I spoke with Liann, I reached back out and asked for her to give advice to the Liann who first appeared on the podcast. Here's what she said.
The advice I would give myself is to be ready to continue digging deeper and opening myself up to a whole new community of people for support. There is never an end to our journeys. It's a cyclical path of healing where we have to allow ourselves grace. And part of our healing often touches on effects of intergenerational traumas, as we know. But I've also learned since my recording that we cannot forget to also celebrate the intergenerational triumphs that give us the strength we need to endure the steps we take on our own healing.
Since you're new to H&R Block, we'll look at your returns from the last 3 years for any money your last guy might have missed for free.
I could get money back from last year?
You could. We'll find any mistakes.
Could have really used that 2 years ago when I dated that mistake for 5 months.
Don't leave money on the table. Switch to H&R Block and get a free Second Look review. Second Look is included at no additional cost with the purchase of tax preparation. Results vary. All tax situations are different. Fees apply if you have us file an amended return.
So good, so good, so good.
New markdowns up to 70% off are at Nordstrom Rack stores now. Fresh kicks, spring tops, new dresses. There's always a score.
I mean, the denim section is unreal.
Why do I rack? All the dresses. I always find something amazing.
Head to your Nordstrom Rack store to find can't-miss deals on all the spring things. Great brands, great prices. That's why you rack.
And now, let's hear from Pat. Today, I am joined by Pat, who was on an episode of DNA Surprises earlier this year. Her episode aired in March. And if you're interested in hearing her full story, I will link her episode in the show notes. But in honor of 100 episodes this season, Pat is joining me to give an update on how things are going. If you remember her episode, we spoke about 6 months after her initial DNA surprise, and now we are chatting, and it's been, a year and 3 months or so, almost a year and a half. And so we want to hear how you're doing. Welcome, Pat, and how are things?
Well, things are much better, especially since the last time we had our podcast. And I want to tell everyone that's been through this that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and healing does happen. It doesn't happen overnight, but it really does. And you have to be patient with yourself and give yourself time, because it just all starts coming together. I remember when I would hear people talk and they weren't crying about their experience, I was amazed, because I could not talk about that subject without crying. And I'm at that point now, and it's nothing wrong with crying. I do occasionally still, but I know that tells me I've done some healing. And a lot of other things have told me that I've done a lot of healing. And it is a really good feeling.
That's so great. Where we left off, you hadn't really formed a ton of new relationships with your family. You had one sister who had dementia, another sister who wasn't particularly interested in pursuing a relationship. So where have you landed now with your newfound family?
Well, that really hasn't changed much, except for the fact that I've grown closer to the people that I do have the connection with. I have 2 cousins, and they are just awesome. I love them. And we have formed a connection. And my niece, that is the daughter of the oldest sister, we have gotten closer and closer. We've yet to meet because of just time and logistics, but we'll get there. I feel very good about that. I had found that I had 3 new sisters, and the oldest one was the one with dementia, and she was in her 80s. I know I shared in the podcast that my biological father was like 17 years older than my mother, so he was older. He was married, as was my mother, and so his children are older. And she was in her 80s, and then the second sister is in her lower 80s, and then the other one is in her lower 70s. So they're all older than me. The sad thing is the oldest sister did pass away a couple of months ago. And so that was one change. So, that door is closed. I won't get the opportunity to meet her. And I know it was hard for the family going through all that. And of course, I grieve for them as well. But I was surprised at how well I handled it. I knew that she was not doing so well. And I wondered, how was that going to be, if or when she passed. And I was a little surprised that I didn't grieve in the way I thought I would. For one thing, I didn't feel bad about not going to her service. I felt that it was the right thing to do, and I didn't have any misgivings about that. I also reached out to comfort her daughter, my niece. That's been difficult to watch her go through that, as anybody that's lost their mother. So we've grown closer, and I'm very, very proud and grateful for that. But the others, the middle sister, I referred to this a little bit, but when I sent letters to all 3 of the sisters, and the oldest sister with dementia, her husband responded, was very gracious. I still hear about him through his daughter. And the middle sister, she called, and she did not believe it. She did not believe that I was related to them. And she asked me not to contact them again, which of course I would not have done. And the youngest sister has just been crickets. I have no idea. The niece that I'm in contact with, I don't want to bother her, by asking about any of that. So I did finally decide I was just going to ask her, had I ever been mentioned? So I did. And she's told me before that I can ask her anything that I want, but I try to respect her position, because I know that she may feel like she's in the middle, and I don't want her to feel that way. I updated her on what I had been told through them, indirectly or directly. And I wondered that if they had ever mentioned me to her. And she said, no. And actually, the youngest sister, the one I've never heard from, that they spent a good deal of time when her mother passed. And she said, I thought, she would mention it then, but she never did. That really was helpful to me, just knowing that. I have been holding out, even in spite of the one sister that was very direct and adamant about not wanting any sort of relationship. I felt out a little bit of hope. I held out because that's just how I am. I just always believe that, everything's going to be okay, and, that people are going to come together and it's all going to work out. That really did help me to have closure, because I had different family members and friends who initially they would ask, have you heard anything? Have you heard anything? And I would say no. And after a while, they just stopped asking. And honestly, Alexis, that was the saddest part, because I knew then that they didn't feel like I was going to ever hear anything. And so I accepted that I was going to have to eventually believe that too. It really did help me to understand that I don't think that they feel that need. And I did tell her that I respected their decision, but I don't understand it, because I did try to put myself in their position. And I thought, what would I do? And I thought about the only dad I have was the dad that raised me, and he loved me and I loved him, still do. And I thought, what would I do? And I thought, well, if there was someone out there that was his child, I would feel a connection to him. There's no DNA involved, but I would have some sort of feelings, and I would want to help that person because they're a part of him. And I know I've heard on other podcasts when others would say they found their bio family and how the relationship started. And so many of them said, wow, it's like we have a part of our family member again. And that's how I would look at it. So I really did. I believe that was why I had such a hard time with that, because I have to say that out of all of the feelings that I had, the grief, the shock, and all of that, the worst part of it for me was that rejection that I felt. I really had to work at coming to terms with it. But I know I read something a long time ago and it seemed to fit. And it said, sometimes rejection is God's protection. It would be hard to have a relationship with someone that really didn't feel good about you. So, it just probably wasn't meant to be. So I'm okay with that. And I'm grateful, very grateful for the relationships that I do have.
Yeah, it's been over a year now. And like you said, it was hard when people stopped asking about connections with your new family. Where do you think you had that mindset shift of acceptance with it all?
Well, part of it was that conversation I had with Denise, but also just time. And one of my family members said, I was discussing it, I don't understand it. I don't know if they'll ever reach out. And they were kind of aggravated and said, why would you want that? Of course, they don't understand. So I've kind of learned that it does matter sometimes, but it doesn't again. That's helped me to understand their feelings. I can see that. They don't know me. They're older. I really can't say, Alexis, what exactly other than time and just a mindset of I want to be happy. I want to feel good, and I don't want to have any sort of bitterness or resentment. I want to go on, and I'm going to accept them for how they are. And it doesn't mean we'll have a relationship, but I've accepted that. That's the way it is. I think while I was continuing to hope, that's a pretty painful place because you're very vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And I moved past that. And I'm not saying that I'm not vulnerable. I'm not saying how I would react if they did reach out. I'm sure I would be receptive, but at the same time, I don't have any qualms about it happening.
Yeah, that's a good place to be. Just kind of no expectations, right? Just going in open, but not expecting anything. Have you learned any new information since we last spoke about your family?
Well, I did. It was very emotional. I met my cousins in Florida where my grandfather lived and my bio father. And we went to the cemetery and I got to see a lot of the family. I've always had an attachment to cemeteries. I don't know. We used to go there a lot when I was a child. My parents would go. I guess they were visiting probably loved ones. And I was always curious about the names on the tombstones. And so that was really emotional. And it gave me a lot of closure too. It made it real. They really did exist, even though I didn't know them. I had a grandfather and I had a grandmother and aunts and uncles and cousins. That was really good. And then in addition to that, my grandfather, he was sort of a mystery. There were a couple of things about him. He has a Spanish last name, and in the DNA of my one sister that has had her DNA done, and in my DNA, there is no Spanish, no Portuguese, there's no Mediterranean link. There's no DNA there. It's like Northern Europe, Scottish, a little bit of this and that, like most Americans, but none of that. In Ancestry, I had the package where you could search through all the documents. It stopped with him. Well, not long ago, I think he was a second cousin tested, and bingo, he came up and it was on the paternal side. Well, I found out that my grandfather had a sister, and that was a big deal because I just really thought that was over. But when it came to their parents, which would be my great-grandparents, he gave me names, but I haven't been able to find anything to prove that. So, but that was significant. And the cousin, she's also interested because she was always full of questions about his history. It was just a mystery. And so I think I'm on the right path, and I'm thinking maybe eventually we're going to get more information as more people test.
Would you say that that's kind of been your biggest outlet for connection with some of the family that, hasn't been open? Is the genealogical research healing in a way?
It is. It's therapeutic. And I feel that connection too, which is what most of us want. We want a connection. Mm-hmm. That's what, life is about. And so I feel like I'm getting that connection in an indirect way. And so that has been very therapeutic. My children are interested in that too. So that's another thing that motivated me to keep going. It's a big win when you find out something, when you get any little piece of document that is linked to them. It just keeps making it more real. And I feel like I know them in so many ways because I know when they got married, I know where they live, I know where they built their house, I know where they worked and things that they did. And as it turned out, my grandfather, I think he had a pretty rough background as far as, probably grew up in poverty. And I'm assuming a lot just from things I've seen and the lack of information. There's usually a good bit of paperwork if somebody has a bit of means. But what was neat about him is that I learned that he was an important part of his community. He was involved in the cemetery association where he ended up being buried, and they had books from different years that they would publish, and he was in the different books. And I'm going to get emotional now. It made me proud because I feel like he came from nothing, and he married my grandmother who saw something in him, and he became what she believed him to be. So yes, that has been very therapeutic.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. That's amazing. One of the things that I really remember about our conversation is you kind of, maybe gratitude isn't the right word, but having some gratitude that all of the players in your story had passed, particularly your mom, because then you couldn't feel like as angry at her as maybe you would have, or it wouldn't have damaged your relationship in some way. How do you feel today about that?
I still feel that way. And you hate to say that you're glad. It's not that. It is the timing of it.
Exactly. Of course.
I was grateful for the timing of it.
Yes.
I don't want to come across as saying I'm glad all these people are gone. No, I knew what you meant. Yeah. But yes, I think the timing was perfect. I know a lot of people say, oh, what if, what if? And I understand that. I think if I would have found out earlier, I would have had a lot of what ifs. It just seemed like for me, the timing was right. I was born in the 50s. My mother had an affair. I'm sure she wasn't sure who was the father, whether it was my dad. When I say my dad, the person who raised me that I know. And she wasn't sure if it was him or my bio father. And what choices did she have in the 50s? If she would have left him and been pregnant, it would have been hard for my siblings. It would have been hard for her. It would have hurt my dad. So many things. I've thought on that a lot, and I feel that she made the best choice. She looked at everything. My mother was a very smart. She was in the beta club in school, and she was a very smart person, pretty analytical. And I think she looked at all those things and she thought, let's just hope my husband is the father. And, I didn't stick out. I didn't look that different. I favored her. There was never any issue. I love my dad. He was a good father. I wouldn't have changed anything. And I'm really glad. I think it would have hurt so many people. And I think that's what I think about. And then I also think about my bio father. He had a wife. He had children. And I think about that. And that would have been terrible. I just feel like the timing was right. I was glad. And, I really wouldn't have wanted to confront her. I would have, but I would not have wanted to confront her. That would have been a hard thing to do. And I hear, I'm in the groups, I'm in the podcast. I hear so many people that are younger that are going through that. And my heart goes out to them because I could have been in that situation. I know it's hard, and it is hard. I hear what they go through. I just feel like for me, everything turned out better. Now, should she have been truthful?
Right.
How can I say I'm glad it happened the way it is, but I wish she'd have told. I really don't wish she would have told. And I feel like, though, that you need to tell the truth, and especially these days and times with DNA. But I'm glad it worked out the way it did.
Yeah. I've always appreciated your outlook and your perspective, because that's not something that I think a lot of people say, right? That they are happy to have found out after the players have passed. And I think that your outlook on it is important, because I think that it's something that people don't always consider, the fallout that can happen. And then, it's your journey, and of course your experience is valid. I'm sure that there's other people who wish that they could answer the questions, right? But thank you for sharing.
Right. I totally see that.
Yeah.
And I did have questions. But I've gotten a lot of answers without having to go through that. But there is nothing wrong with how you handle it. Each person has to do what's right for them. And that was my feeling about my life. And that's how I felt. I'm so grateful that I grew up with my brothers and my sister, because if things would have turned out differently, I don't know. And so I just feel like everything fell into place as it should. And I honestly do have compassion for my mother in spite of what she did. I don't like what she did. It hurt a lot of people, but she married young. I mean, I'm not making excuses for her. I kind of know why she did some of the things. So that satisfies me, because I know the why, even though I don't understand how she could do that. It helped me. I had a lot of compassion for his wife as well. I remember early on, when you first find out, you do a lot of digging, and I found her obituary, and she was sounded like an amazing woman. And Alexis, I just cried, for her, because, she was similar to my dad in that situation, unknowing and trusting and loving your spouse. But I'd like to think that both of them learned from that lesson and changed, because he did remain married to her. And the family members that I've spoken to, they all said he was a really nice man and a good person. And my mother was too. I can't judge her by that one thing she did, even though it kind of upheaved my life. I have to separate that from the rest of it. And she had a lot of good qualities too, as I know he did.
Yeah. Again, you have so much compassion. What has gotten you to the place where you are now versus almost a year ago when we first spoke? What has helped you process?
Well, our podcast that we have, it helps. Now I'm in a place where I feel like that I can listen and empathize with and support and encourage some of the people that are going through what I was going through a year ago. And that is very healing. It also helps you to remember where you were and, okay, I am doing better. I'm not in that same painful place. I think, I've got a good family and they've been very supportive. My husband knows I have to talk about it still. It's a part of me now. It comes up in very many things. And so he's understanding about that. But I don't know if other people are as understanding. So I'm hesitant to talk about it as much. But he has been my rock through all of this. He listens and he calls it my DNA stuff. He'll say, "Oh, are you upset about your DNA stuff?" And I'll say, "Yeah, I'm having, a rough day." But I will say I very rarely have a bad day anymore. I might have a bad minute, but I don't have bad days anymore.
Yeah.
So he has really helped me. My faith has helped me. I love to laugh and I find humor in a lot of things. I got that from my dad. One of my sons said, "That's one thing, Mom, you are definitely a product of nurture over nature," because I am a lot like him. He was a hoot. He could pick anything apart and find something to laugh about. And I think we all got that from him. Even when it's dark, sometimes, we'll laugh and it helps us get through things. So my humor and my friends, I have a good support system. And my siblings, if I want to talk about it, I know that they will. I just know I have a husband that'll listen. And so I just kind of dump it on him.
What is next for you in your DNA surprise journey? You've made so much progress, and yet it's only been about a year and a half. So what are you looking forward to?
I would like to meet my niece. We haven't, like I said, met face to face. I've gotten closer to her, but I'd like to meet her. And I do know her family, her children, her grandchildren through Facebook, social media, different ways. And so I have made that connection, but I'd like to, I'd like for us, my husband and I, to meet her and her husband at some point. So next time we're going that way, we're going to try to make a plan, continue to develop these relationships that I've formed and continue to move forward. And I think I have pretty much accepted things and I want to continue to do that. I do have moments where I think, when the mail is coming, I'll wonder, maybe they decided to send some photos or something and that doesn't last long. But I would like to get to the point where I don't really think about that.
Do you still think about it every day? How often do you think about it now?
Not every day. Probably something will trigger it. No, not every day.
I think that's a place a lot of people will find comfort in, right? Is reaching that point where you can talk about it without crying and where you aren't thinking about it every minute, every hour, every day, like in those early moments.
And when my dad died, I asked my husband, because I had never heard like that. He was the first person that I was so close to that passed away. And I knew my husband had lost his dad when he was 20 before I knew him. And I knew he had been through that process. And I didn't really see him crying. I don't think I've ever seen him cry about his dad. He would talk about him and, I could tell he was still grieving at times. But I knew that he was beyond where I was because I was just distraught when he died. And I said, "Does it ever get better?" And he said, "Yes, it does." I said, "Because it just hurts so bad." And he said, "Yes, it gets better and it'll get to where, it doesn't hurt all the time." he's always told me the truth. So I held on to that. And I remember one day, it was just out of the blue. Some of us were talking about my dad. There's always a funny story or a funny saying he had. And I laughed, and it was, a good laugh. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm healing. I'm on the way to healing. And that was really some good advice. And so I'm able to laugh about this now, which is good. We make some jokes, we all do, about the whole situation. There are so many layers to it that you can cry or laugh about. But I like to laugh about it because what am I going to do? I'm not going to change anything. That doesn't say that I don't still get upset or cry, but I've gotten to the point where I can laugh about it. And just like when I lost my dad, I feel like, okay, I'm healing.
Yes. When I first spoke with you, I asked you what advice you had for a parent who is keeping a DNA surprise from a child. And I also asked what advice you had for somebody who had just had a DNA surprise. And today, I would like to ask you what advice you have for Pat from October of 2023.
It's going to get better. You're going to get to where you can laugh about this, and it won't hurt every day. Your life will go on. It will always be a part of you, but it will get better. And remember, you are something, because even though you might not be accepted by others who, now are related to, my biological father is not a half father. I might have half sisters and half siblings, but he's not a half father. He is my father. He's 100% my father. And that's the truth. And I think about that often when, I was made initially to feel like I was a little less than. I'm not.
Yeah. That's such good advice. I really like asking people this question, because when it just happens, especially when I spoke to you, like it was so fresh, it's sometimes really hard to see what's ahead and that it does get better. And whatever the outcome, whether you are accepted by your newfound family or not, whether you can ask parents questions or not, it can still get better. So thank you for sharing that.
I appreciate so much your podcast and all of the community. These are some of the best people. I know that it seems that people who have experienced pain have a lot of empathy for others. And I think that's what binds us all together. But it's such a supportive community. And I love it when anyone reaches out and there's always somebody there, encouraging. Maybe I don't have time, but somebody else will do it. And then sometimes they don't have time and I can do it. But it's just a great community because you've got people there who know what you're going through. They listen. And I'm very grateful for that. Thank you, Alexis, for starting this podcast.
Thank you so much, Pat. And thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for coming on and sharing an update. And for anyone listening, Pat is underselling her involvement in the DNA surprise community because she shows up almost every third Thursday, and you are just a constant voice of reassurance and support for people that have been in this for a while and people that are brand new to it. And I just so appreciate your presence with the community that we have all built together. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Liann and Pat for joining me and sharing their updates today. If you have a DNA surprise that you'd like to share, submit your story at dnasurprises.com. Until next time. This episode of DNA Surprises was hosted, produced, and edited by me, Alexis Auerselt. It was mixed and mastered by Josh Auerselt of Siren Recording Studios.